Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today. And in this programme we'll be asking what are the political and spiritual dangers of David Cameron, our Foreign Secretary, calling for a unilateral Palestinian state, and what happens now to the Labour Party now that it looks like so many Muslim voters are deserting the Labour Party over its stance on Israel. And in this programme today I'm joined by Pastor Tim Guttman from the Christian Action Against Anti-Semitism and Robert Harris, Voice for Justice UK. So guys, welcome to the programme. I'll start off with you, Tim. Welcome back to the programme. I know it's been a very busy time for you and your wife Hayley, but just give us an update on the work that you are doing through Christian Action Against Anti-Semitism, which is so needed as we see record levels of Jew hatred in this country that we haven't seen since the 1930s and 40s.
Absolutely, and thanks for having me again, Simon. Yeah, CAAA, we call it CAAA. We've been...
That's easier to say.
Yeah, it's a lot easier. We've been involved in, doing a lot of events, with showing solidarity to the Jewish community. So when they have events, we'll support them. We've also been doing a lot in Jewish schools and shuls. We're organising a huge event helping organise a huge event in Sydney. So somebody from this great synagogue in Sydney came to our event in London when we were just praying for the Jewish people, and he was like, we need this there. So that's coming up in a week. So there's lots and lots, and people keep saying to us, can you do this in Glasgow, Canada? So we're busy.
Very good, very good. And Robert, it's great to have you back on the programme. Always a pleasure to have you on the programme. Do you want to just unpack for us how your work, which is vital work in terms of our Christian freedom, is going through Voice for Justice UK, and also the Commission of Inquiry looking into the discrimination and marginalisation of Christians in what is becoming an increasingly secular militant workplace?
The Commission of Inquiry into Discrimination Against Christians is a few months into its operation. It's expected to last for 2 years, and a panel will be hearing testimonies from Christians who say they have faced discrimination in all areas of society. Perhaps I can make just a brief appeal to Christians listening. If you are a Christian and you believe that you have faced discrimination, injustice or hostility on account of your Christian faith, you're invited to come forward and give your evidence to our inquiry. Our interim reports will be produced and our final report is expected to go before Parliament. If you're worried about anonymity, we have that cared for. You can either be public or you can be private. You can discuss all your concerns with us, but whether it's in the workplace, online, in education, in any sphere of society where you've experienced this discrimination, your testimony counts and we want to hear from you.
Absolutely, and the website is on screen. Tim, I've just come back from Israel, 5-day solidarity mission to Israel, sponsored thankfully by my friends at the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, UK. And we visited the horrific sites of October the 7th, kibbutz near Oz, the devastation caused there. One of 3 car parks of 1,300 cars destroyed, many of them burnt to smithereens. Other cars had bullet shots with people inside them murdered in cold blood by Hamas. And yet at the same time, when Israel is in no mood for a ceasefire, literally fighting a war for her very survival, and the prospect of war against Hezbollah in the north grows stronger each day, our Foreign Secretary David Cameron pops up and a clear departure of British foreign policy, calling for a unilateral Palestinian state to be imposed on Israel outside of the negotiated framework of the Oslo Peace Accords and outside the agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority themselves, and impose a Palestinian state on Israel, whilst Israel is fighting against a genocidal terrorist organisation known as Hamas, responsible for the murder of over 1,200 people on October the 7th. Share with us your thoughts.
Well, it's crazy. It's the timing is unbelievable. This is not what an ally does. It's like somebody going to, London and saying, will you consider giving London to Hezbollah? I mean, this is a war with a terrorist organisation, genocidal. What David Cameron said, I mean, it's very base, logically, it's like rewarding terrorism, number one. Number two, we know the spiritual implications. I think we'll talk about that in a bit as well for this nation. And number three, this is not what an ally does. An ally doesn't, when a nation is at war, a defensive war, yet again, another defensive war, Israel is fighting, say to them and try and impose this idea that, you know, Britain will recognise another state. And historically, that, you know, the Palestinians have been offered states before and they've rejected them. Even, I think, offered parts of Jerusalem, sacred parts, to the Jews, and they've rejected. They don't want two states. They want one state. This is crass timing.
Yeah. And Robert, you know, this announcement by David Cameron, whether he's speaking on his own or whether he's speaking for the entire government of Rishi Sunak, is a clear departure in Conservative foreign policy towards Israel. Prior to this, we've always seen that the Conservative Party has been very strong and resolute in its support for Israel. Having said that, they do support the creation of a Palestinian state. We know that that is policy. But this is almost going back to the dark days of the French government of President Hollande in calling for a unilateral Palestinian state to be imposed on Israel. Can you just unpack for us why you think there's such a major sea change in Conservative and government foreign policy when it comes to trying to propose a unilateral Palestinian state on Israel?
I think my first thought is I'd like to be able to say in an ideal world that there should be a Palestinian state alongside Israel. However, it's very premature to be speaking about that proposal. Cameron recognises that this can't happen until the war ends and all the hostages are released. The problem is, it's very imprudent. It's very, it lacks feasibility, the proposal, even in the foreseeable future, because, first of all, Israel must be part of any development on the front of recognising Palestinian statehood. There's always been an understanding from the United States and the United Kingdom that any move in that direction must involve Israel. Why? Because of security. And the Israeli government have said time and time again that any settlement, I'm talking about those governments that have been open to the prospect of a Palestinian state, there's always been the understanding that Israeli security guarantees must be embedded within any eventual development. So for Cameron to be bringing this proposal up now, and also he said something along the lines that this recognition, if it happened, wouldn't have to depend on the eventual peace negotiations being resolved. And then I think to myself, well, hang on a minute, how does it work then? If the peace negotiations have not been resolved, how do you, as Tim has suggested, how do you then say to Palestine, well, we'll give you your state, we'll recognise your state, and it's a kind of reward? I suspect David Cameron is trying to buy political capital at a time when the party is coming under immense criticism from those on the left of the party and also outside the party who are more pro-Palestine in their sentiments. So he's trying to appease that part of the electorate who think that British government support for Israel is a step too far. So I think he's trying to, as I say, buy political capital. I think this also needs to be seen in the context of Anthony Blinken. It was recently reported that he has instructed State Department officials to review the options for US and international recognition of a Palestinian state. Now, that's a very open-ended thing. They're not saying they're going to do anything, but I think he's trying to play to the tune of what we see in the US, and also the UN Secretary General recently, who is not exactly a great mouthpiece for justice on this issue, given his appalling comments a number of months ago about the October the 7th massacre should not be seen in a vacuum. But he has said, you know, this is a threat to global peace if the Palestinian state is not recognised. So I think there's a lot of strategy going on here rather than any wisdom. It's definitely not wise at this point or in the foreseeable future to be talking about a Palestinian state.
And the danger is, and this is the reality of the geostrategic situation on the ground, that Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, is literally, he was elected to that position after the death of Arafat, but he's only served one term in office. So he's completed his 5 years in office, and he's been in power for 15 years since then. So he has no political legitimacy. The reality on the ground that if Israel is forced into conceding a Palestinian state, Fatah and the Palestinian Authority won't be there. If there are democratic elections for the president and parliamentary elections, Hamas will win. Mm-hmm. So Israel is then having to deal with a situation like she's faced in Gaza, but on a huge scale, right up on the strategic heights of the Judean hills, overlooking Israel, overlooking Ben Gurion Airport. That actually puts Israel in danger. But also, this would lock in Jordan into a Palestinian state, which would radicalize Jordan and lead to the overthrow of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. So the consequences are not just for Israel, but for the entire region of the world. Absolutely. This is 30 years of failure, and they lack the foresight to say, if the Palestinians have their own state, there will be peace. No, they will use that as a staging block to destroy Israel, but be one step closer to do it. And then we'll see possibly another Holocaust take place, something like October the 7th, but 100-fold. And Tim, I want to go into the kind of spiritual aspects of this, the great spiritual dangers of recognising a unilateral Palestinian state by a British government. We only have to look to Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 to 3, where God says, I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you, referring to Abraham. But also we see also in the book of Joel that God says, I will bring the nations into the valley of Jehoshaphat, which is in Jerusalem, for judgment, which is Armageddon, because they divided my land and scattered my people. But isn't that exactly what a Palestinian state would do?
Absolutely. You know, this is, that's what the word of God says. It's Genesis 12, 1 to 3, you know, I will bless those who bless you. And like you said, that's a big one actually in Joel, because you can see that, and you can see how, you know, those who have scattered the Jews, you can see what's happened to those empires, those who've touched the apple of God's eye. It's like poking God in the eye. And you can see what's happened to the Roman Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Nazis, Britain, and actually look at our own past, you know, look at our own history, look at when we broke our promise, referring to the Balfour Declaration. A lot of people don't realise this, but actually that moment when we broke our promise to the Jewish people, when we limited the amount of Jewish people that could come into the land during the Holocaust and sent them back basically to the camps. And afterwards as well, a lot of people have heard of the SS Exodus. Did you know on that same day that we stormed the SS Exodus, a ship full of survivors, to put them in our own camps in Cyprus? That very same day, India declared independence, and that was the end of the empire as we know it. And spiritually, you know, the number of Christians and the effect it's had on the church since in this country has been a free fall. What would happen if we were to declare a Palestinian state spiritually? Just look at the past. It can only spell danger.
Absolutely. And Robert, I have to ask you, why is David Cameron also pushing for a Palestinian state when the leadership of the Palestinian Authority have a horrendous human rights record? Any person living in the Palestinian Authority who would dare criticize the Palestinian Authority, arrested, never seen again, tortured, probably even murdered. And then the other aspect we have to bring into this one is the sheer corruption, that more money has been given to the Palestinian Authority and the leaders of the Palestinian Authority than all the money given in the Marshall Aid Plan to rebuild Europe after the Second World War. Billions and billions and billions gone into the pockets of these leaders of the PLO. So share with us how, for example, there's no guarantees that even if you do push through a Palestinian state, it's going to be a success anyway.
I think it's incredibly naive. Look, there's this scheme which is dubbed the pay for slay scheme. So this is all out in the open. It's not conspiratorial. It's all documented. The Palestinian Authority, in their law, they recognise the right, as they would see it, for people who have killed Israeli Jews or attempted to kill them, for them to be given monthly salaries, or that their families get the monthly salaries. So they are rewarding terror very openly, very proudly. They don't apologise for it. This is one of the big security considerations that Israel considers when there's talk about a Palestinian state. Then you've got the education issue. UNRWA has been in the news a lot recently, all for the wrong reasons. And, well, there's a history to this. Look, there's a report produced by the Jerusalem Centre for Public Affairs, which is a very well documented report that looks into the pay for slay issue that I've just mentioned a few moments ago. There's also another fantastic report produced by UN Watch that looks into the education issue. So what do we know about the education issue? So teachers working under the banner of UNRWA promote hatred, violence, glorification of terrorism, encouraging martyrdom. The curricula that's used within the schools has all this hateful and violent content. So this is actually breeding a whole new generation of dangerous people who are going to be very hostile to Israel. And immediately we have to ask the question, well, what does that say about the security, the future security of the Israeli state? It's really madness to be talking about Palestinian statehood when you have embedded within the system of education a mindset that is promoting hatred and murder of Israeli Jews. You need to deal with that. And Benjamin Netanyahu has in fact said, I think more than once, that Gaza in the post-war scenario needs to be denazified. He actually used that language of denazification. But I think that language also applies to the Palestinian Authority within Gaza, the West Bank. So I think this is the big elephant in the room. Education and security, they are embedded. The two need to be seen together. So unless we deal with that problem, we can't speak with any feasibility about recognising Palestinian statehood.
Can I add something to what you've said?
Yes.
Our taxes are funding this.
Absolutely.
They are funding terrorism. They are funding genocide, and they are creating an environment whereby Israelis no longer feel safe. I'll give you an example. I met my close Israeli friends, and they're like family. And one of my best friends, she's an Israeli, her name's Tal, and she has 3 beautiful young boys and a lovely husband. And she said that her oldest son rather, came up to her and said to her, after having a nightmare, Mummy, are Hamas going to take me as a hostage? Are they going to take you as a hostage? Now, we don't have that in this country, but they do. And that is what they're dealing with. So to actually, our taxes being used to fund that sort of terrorism, that I think is a crime in itself, and our government should do what the Trump administration did and complete every penny that we pour into the Palestinian Authority out until they reform their education system, until they are wanting to look after their own people first and improve their human rights record. Then we can start talking about where we should see the direction of the Palestinian Authority head in the future.
May I just make one very final brief statement on that? In the past, there was talk of exchanging land for peace. Now, the reality is that it's exchanging land for further terror. And that's really what it's about. That's the sad reality that we face at the moment.
No, absolutely. And Tim, I just want to read out what David Cameron has said on a visit to Lebanon last week. He says, what we need to do is to give the Palestinian people horizon towards a better future, the future of having a state of their own. He added that recognition of a Palestinian state is absolutely vital for the long-term peace and security of the region. Now, share with us, we had a peace plan. It was known as the Abraham Accords. It was working, but President Biden totally reversed that, made it meaningless, and empowered the extremist elements within the Middle East, namely the Iranian regime, the Palestinian Authority, the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, all because of his foreign policy targeting and trying to support a Palestinian state that will be used to destroy Israel.
Absolutely. And it's like we were just saying, you know, a Palestinian state at this moment is a vehicle to more terror. And you said it earlier, and actually what you said was chilling. I mean, it would be another Holocaust. And the policy of reversing, you know, the Abraham Accords and all of this stuff, a lot of people actually don't realise, especially in the West, and I think people aren't waking up to this, is the fact that it isn't a state they want. Actually, when you were mentioning those regimes, they follow a particular branch of Islam which isn't going to stop until every Jew is killed. And, you know, you've heard the saying, first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people, and they won't stop there. This is a danger to us all. This is a danger to the West. So why on earth, I can't get this, you know, we can stand with Ukraine, and rightfully so, a democracy that was attacked by another nation. Why is it so hard to see, to stand with Israel, to stand and support Israel, and to see the dangers of what's been going on in the foreign policy, of what's been going on with this talk of statehood, of all our tax, I mean, you just said our tax money is going to this education that's teaching this hate. And our tax money as well is making these guys, these Hamas leaders, billionaires.
Absolutely.
Why is it so hard for people to see that actually Israel is fighting a war that if Israel wasn't there, they'd be coming after us? And so I can't understand why politicians in the West can't see that. I think there's so much, a lot of things that are making people very cynical with politics, with political parties, the timing of what Cameron said, like you say. I think we need something new, don't we?
Absolutely. And Robert, share with us the impact that Israel's war against Hamas is having upon our domestic policy, because you sent me a very interesting video, which is very interesting. So what do you make of a recent poll conducted amongst the Muslim population that was published in The Guardian recently? And I'll read out what it says. It says only 60% of British Muslims who backed Labour at the 2019 general election are willing to do so again at the next general election, expected this year. The survey finds, which is done by Survation, which conducted the poll for the Labour Muslim Network, spoke to 682 British Muslims. 9% were willing to back the Liberal Democrats, and more than 20% of the Muslim voters remain undecided, giving Labour some hope. But share with us how this is having an impact because of Kier Starmer's, I'm going to say, courage in not giving in to pressure to call for a ceasefire and standing with Israel.
Well, this is not a surprise, I think, given the very strong anti-Israel sentiments within the Muslim communities of this country. I think we can expect this. How that translates into an election result is an interesting thing, because the Conservatives have a big majority since the last 2019 election. They had 365 seats. Labour had 197. In fact, Conservatives lost 16 seats. But then you have to think, well, okay, what's the Muslim population within the UK? 6.5%, about 4 million answered the question, I am Muslim, in the last census. So does that have a massive impact on the next election? I would say probably not. But then we need to factor in something else. There are people who are not Muslim, who are, shall we say, progressive. I would say hard left, very anti-Israel in their sentiments. When we factor them in, then perhaps the impact on the next election might be quite significant. But we need to actually cite some polls to actually give that some meaning. But I think there's definitely going to be further moves away from traditional Labour supporters, given Kier Starmer's very brave stance on this issue.
And Tim, what are your thoughts on this issue? Because, the Labour Party has shifted, thankfully, from the position it was in 2019, being headed up by Jeremy Corbyn, who was the leader of the Labour Party, constantly under investigation for Jew hatred and the marginalisation and bullying of Jewish members of Parliament and also Jewish members of the Labour Party. And so we see that Jeremy Corbyn's position was very akin to that of the majority of the Muslim population in this country, with their hostility towards Israel. So share with us the possible impact that this could have for the Labour Party and Kier Starmer going into a general election, knowing that his support for Israel could mean that he would lose the Muslim vote.
Yeah, I've seen so many things on social media about Muslims talking about not backing Labour because of Kier. And like you, I admire Kier's position. I think he's been courageous and he's stood strong in his stance. With the Muslim vote we're talking about, however small it seems, I think, Labour possibly losing that vote. We've got something else at play as well. When I said we need something new, a lot of people are disillusioned with the Tories, particularly in the area of immigration.
Yeah,
and it's changing, actually, our nation. It's changing our political landscape. Like, for example, London's very different to what it was. So we've always been a Judeo-Christian nation, and these things are being changed. So a lot of people are disillusioned with the Tories and immigration. I will be disillusioned if Cameron goes ahead with this, unilaterally declaring a Palestinian state. Where does our vote go then? And where the Muslim vote go? And you've got Reform, who actually are going to take votes away from Conservative, which is going to help Labour. It's a very confusing time, I think, politically. And with the Muslim vote and the Muslim MPs as well, I think as Christians, can we please bear this in mind? As Christians, we need to be careful. We need to do our research, who we are voting. For example, you look at Scotland, he's been saying a lot anti-Israel, pro-Hamas things.
Yeah.
So,
and
he is a Muslim First Minister. So be careful, who are you voting, and make sure you're doing your research, because all of these things, these are massive in terms of a nation's spiritual.
Absolutely. We're down to about a minute and a half. So, Robert, share with us how our viewers should respond to this challenge of David Cameron calling for a unilateral Palestinian state, how the issue of Israel and the Jewish community will play a major role in this general election, and how we need the wisdom of the Lord to pray for our government, but also how we should pray for this political situation. 30 seconds.
It brings up so many issues. I think when you see the hatred on the streets of London in these marches, which is an outward visible expression of what's going on, I think we need to pray that there won't be any violence, that there will be peace on the streets of the UK.
Excellent. So Tim and also Robert, thank you so much for being my guest on this week's Politics Today. I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. I think the spiritual consequences of our nation, following the lead of our Foreign Secretary David Cameron in calling for a unilateral Palestinian state, would be a spiritual disaster that would fall upon our nation. We need to pray for wisdom, that our government would push back on that idea, continue to support Israel in a war against this genocidal terrorist organisation that would commit another Holocaust if they could, known as Hamas, and we stand for the righteousness which is supporting the nation of Israel. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.